Well, that's right. Yeah, at any point he could.
Hi everyone, this is Second Sight NYC. You can join us each Thursday at 8 p.m. Eastern Standard Time on the UFO Paranormal Radio Network.
We're a parapsychic radio show that isn't afraid to push the limits.
We have limits?
Well, if we do, we haven't found them yet.
Chris is the godfather of psychic mediums, and he'll give you a reading you can't refuse.
You better believe it. And Stephanie is the co-hostess with the mostest.
Relax there, Chris.
Yeah, okay. Second Sight NYC is the show that even the spirits listen to.
How can you make such a claim?
Well, the spirits told me. Give us 2 hours to open your minds to the possibilities of what could be.
This show is all about what is seen and unseen, known and unknown, and everything in between.
Each week, we make the unbelievable believable.
Join us.
Welcome to another episode of The Dawn of Shades. I'm your host, Gia Scott, and today is August 7th, 2012. Tonight is a whole new conversation about urban homesteading, a topic that sounds quite intriguing, and I think just about anybody can benefit from it. But before we get started, we're going to start off with the usual information and reminders. We are still collecting recipes for a cookbook project, and you can email them to me at giascott@exogenynetwork.com. I hope everybody sends in their recipes so we truly get a diverse look at the foods that all of us eat. So get them emailed in, don't wait. Now for tonight's program, just like all programs, I love to have the audience's input with questions and comments. So no matter how you're listening, you can email them to me at giascott@exogenynetwork.com. Now, this is true even if you're listening in on a rebroadcast or podcast of the program, so please go ahead and send in your question or comment with that little quick email, and I will try and get an answer for you. Now, while we're talking about email, I really appreciate the listeners who try to tell me what they think about the program and whether it's something positive or not, even if they don't like it. I also love getting requests for topics and particular guests, and it sort of gives my psychic side a break from trying to figure out what it is that people want and need to hear about the most. So, help me out there and send me in your requests, and I'll try my best to get to those topics and those people to come on the radio with us. Now, moving right along, we are now going to have a chance to hear from our guest tonight, who is Rachel Kaplan. Rachel, would you be so kind as to introduce yourself to the audience?
Hi, thanks so much. Sure, I'd be happy to. I am the co-author of Urban Homesteading, Heirloom Skills for Sustainable Living, which is a book that came out last year. I co-wrote it with my longtime comrade, Kay Ruby Bloom, who runs an institute called the Institute for Urban Homesteading in Oakland, California. And we wrote our book because we live a lifestyle of self-sufficiency and productivity in the city, and we felt that sharing some of the information we had about food growing and soil building and taking care of animals and living kind of a farming life in the city was a really interesting, vital thing to share with people. And as we wrote the book, we interviewed a lot of people who live around in our area in Northern California who are also living the same way. So we found, which we already knew, but we learned more, that this is a whole movement of people all around our country, where people in big cities and small cities and suburbs, and of course in the rural area where people have always been homesteading, there's people everywhere now learning to grow their food and to turn their homes and their neighborhoods into places that are productive and generative. And we met a lot of people who are inspiring, who are doing a lot of interesting experiments, some of which were succeeding wildly and some of which were failing spectacularly. We really learned that everywhere citizens are responding to the kind of multiple pressures of global climate change and the expense of oil and the declining economy and the lack of support in a certain way for people from either government or institutions that used to support people more effectively, and people are starting to really live this do-it-yourself ethic. So that's what the book is about. It's really a beautiful book with lots of color, photographs and illustrations and hundreds of do-it-yourself projects, and it really tackles every aspect that we could think of homegrown sustainability. So we talk about gardening, and we talk about soil building and fertility of the soil, and worms and mushrooms and compost bins, and how to save a seed and how to start a plant, and what to do with your harvest once you've got it, how to can it and dry it, and then do all these processes that used to be part of the everyday life before the world got more oriented towards convenience and speed and money. These were skills that everybody had. So, natural building, and then water conservation, waste management, energy conservation. There's just many, many aspects of the sustainable lifestyle that we tend to in the book. So that's who I am. People say to me, do you make a living as a homesteader? And I have to say I have a life as a homesteader, but that my day job is as a therapist. So I work with individuals and families and groups of people to help them understand what's going on in their lives, remove obstacles they have towards their own personal or communal progress. And I find that the two works are interestingly interconnected, that the homesteading life brings not only abundance, material abundance to people, but also spiritual and emotional abundance. So there's interesting overlaps that I love to talk about, the connection between taking care of the world, taking care of ourselves, and how they are integrated realities.
They really, really are. There's a lot of interconnection. I know my kids were labeled ADHD, and this, of course, the school would prefer that they got a pill shoved down their throat every day to make them easy to manage. But I found that outdoor activities, gardening, going out into the woods, whatever, was a way for them to sort of stay grounded and aware of what the rest of the world is doing. They were much calmer for other people to feel.
There's a lot of research that shows that kids who have more contact with nature, more understanding of where their food comes from, more understanding of the growing process, are definitely healthier and more balanced. And there are studies also about the relationship of nature to the ADHD diagnosis. So you discovered that in your own way, but it is really validated.
Yeah, I told my kids, my reaction to my kids was, look, that lim's the wrong one. I said, your brain just works different than some other people's. Yours actually can do more things at once, so you just have to decide where you wanted to go. It was like,
there you go.
Oh, well, so no big deal. But they also claim that it's genetic, and in my family that's probably the norm. So we're all used to coping with it, and you just kind of keep on going.
There you go.
And that's the thing too. But on the urban homesteading, I'll tell you why I thought this was so fascinating. Was we're in the process of buying a house. Well, Lex would be in it in a couple of weeks now. And as much as I would have liked to have moved into the country, there's a lot of reasons why we couldn't. And part of it is we live in Mississippi, and rural internet is about as scarce as finding that $1 million home for $10. It just isn't going to happen. There's entire towns that don't have internet in Mississippi. So in order to have, some of the modern conveniences, internet's often connected with, as well as other things, we had to sort of compromise. Well, I'm not going to have the 5 acres I would like to have. Instead, I've got 120 feet square.
Right.
And, so I have to rethink, because I did come from a rural lifestyle. I did keep chickens and horses and goats and whatnot. And, that's going to be scaled down for a, not really urban in my case, but because it's a really small city or a big small town, however you want to look at it. And, so I had to think about it in a different way. And so the urban homesteading, it was, that was how, I became interested in the concept, was that, okay, we're going to be doing something different than the traditional homesteading. And can it be as viable as the traditional homesteading? I'm also not 20-something anymore.
Right, and you do other jobs, right? You're not trying to make your living growing your own food, so you also have to think about how to make something like this happen within the bigger context of your life. So we live in a small city also, and which is just north of San Francisco. So I don't live in San Francisco proper, but we have a less space than you do. We have about 6,500 square feet. And our house is a little bit under 1,200 square feet, and then there's another structure on the property, but some big trees also. So we have to deal with the problems of shade and the limitations of just the size that we have. And we've found that being really thoughtful about where we place things and what elements we really want to have, we're able to fit a lot of things in. I also do keep a garden, not just in my own house, but also I have a community garden plot, which was the first garden I had when I moved to this town. And then I actually garden in the backyard of a friend. And so I have 3 gardens that I can bike to each one of, so I can get there without using my car. And I've tricked out my bicycle with baskets, and so I can harvest my potatoes and bring them home, get a good workout, do multiple things at once. And I've had to get really smart, like what would I plant at home, what would I plant further out? And I think about the further out gardens as places where things that you only have to harvest once would go, like the potatoes go there, or the drying beans go there, or the onions or the garlic, things, or the squashes, things that don't need to be harvested daily. So all the greens and the herbs and the beans, like the string beans, they're all in my backyard, so I can go outside every afternoon and go, what am I going to eat for dinner? And so I've gotten very crafty about where things go. And also, there's something about using space that isn't in your own yard that's an interesting choice to make when you're homesteading in a smaller place. Because, one of the things, like if you had 5 acres, you could provide for your whole family. You could grow everything you needed pretty much. And in the urban homestead, nobody's going to be self-sufficient. You don't have the space. So what starts happening that I think is really interesting, you start making different relationships with their neighbors and with people around them, more reciprocal relationships. Like I have this great relationship with the woman whose house I garden in her backyard, and she's like an unlikely person for me to be friends with. We're at really different times in our lives. We have really different backgrounds. We're just energetically totally different, but we meet in the garden and we plan the garden, and she's learned a ton about gardening just by having me back there, and I get this benefit of this fairly large space where I can grow a lot of food that my family eats all year long. So it's this really beautiful trade, and it really has created this one more web of connectivity in my life by just getting out of my backyard. So I like to give people that example because sometimes you just have to think outside the box of what it means to.
Well, it sounds too like this urban homesteading is more social. I mean, face it, if you are homesteading in a rural location, it's pretty solitary. Mm-hmm. You don't spend a lot of time socializing because you're spending your time working with your gardens and your fields and your pastures and trees and animals. You're not at your neighbors. Right.
Well, sometimes, historically, people who homesteaded did help each other. It was time to bring in the harvest, and everyone would go to somebody's field one day and somebody else's field the next, and people did help each other. So I think one of the things also about homesteading, urban homesteading, is a lot of people say to me as I talk to them, there's nothing new about what you're saying. These are all old skills, and that's totally true. There's nothing new about this except for who's doing it and where it's happening. It's happening in cities with people who don't have histories of being land-based in any way. People are not necessarily recently related to rural pieces of property, but they're learning to do these things. But, the history of the tradition of the barn raising is partly happening again with in the urban area where neighbors are helping each other, people are sharing time and labor and bounty and information and resources. We have a listserv that we started in my town of people who are interested in this, who are doing this at their homes, to kind of raise the level of inspiration, like to say, this is what I did this week, what are you going to do? But also we ask questions when we have extra plants or extra food, or we want to trade something, or we need some people to come and help us. We post it on the listserv, and people show up for each other. So that's been a really great way of using modern technology to help with these sort of timeless tasks of growing food and taking care of animals. And so it's an interesting melding of old and new technology to make this happen, which I really appreciate.
So the book, it really sounds like it was born out of even a sharing of experiences, your experiences with other people's experiences, and maybe a little bit about, okay, this absolutely didn't work, and this seems to work pretty good, you know, when you're talking with other people, so that you could sort of weed out things and maybe make it easier for the person that picks up your book rather than starting from scratch.
Yeah, well, what we tried to do was to present, you know, different projects from very beginning to more advanced in each category that we approached, from gardening to water saving. Like where we live in California, there's a lot of problems with water. We don't have enough. And so we have to get really crafty if we want to grow food to save and recycle water. So we do a lot of stuff about things like that. You know, how do you use gray water and how do you use rainwater in dry places? Or we really we didn't present so much like the mistakes that people made, although sometimes what we did was by interviewing people and then the interviews are in the book. There's about 25 interviews with different people who are doing different things and approaching the questions of homesteading in different ways. That was our place where we could say, oh, this was an experiment, and next time I might do it this way, because that's also part of the process. Like you try something, and maybe it works okay for a season, but then you think, oh, I'm going to try it again in another way. So there's sort of the spirit of experimenting and of trying and maybe failing and continuing to try was represented, but we gave some really concrete projects that people could do that if, you know, and somebody wrote a review of the ones that I love so much. They're like, if you do 10% of these, you'd be a hero of the revolution. You know, it's just, there's a lot of information, a lot of things you can do, and we really encourage people to start small and to start with something they love, to really follow their impulse to live sustainably. And, you know, some people love growing food, and some people really care about reducing their carbon footprint, and other people are really concerned about water, and some people love to grow herbs and make medicine out of them. You know, there's so many different beautiful processes. Some people love to cook. Some people hate to cook. They're not going to care about so much the chapters on fermentation or cheese making. You know, that's not going to be as inspiring, but there's a place, I think, in the book for everybody who wants to participate, to really get started and to think about, you know, to try things out and then to see how that impacts their lives and the lives of their family, and see if it actually works, if you can maintain it. You know, sometimes there's problems when we start to live sustainably. We think we have to do everything right all at once, and I think that's not how change happens. It's like step by step. We're stepping towards living sustainably. We're not really going to, I don't think, ever get there in our lifetimes, but we can surely do better than we're doing now, you know? We can surely learn how to live in better relationship to our resources and our needs as humans than we're currently doing. And that's really what the book is about. It's like, how can you integrate some of these practices into your life so that you're living more responsibly?
Well, I guess I kind of looked at the book as sort of a source of inspiration. I mean, not to say that I would never do something exactly like it is in the book, but I tend to be a person that's I feel quite freely that I can experiment with almost anything. Right. Sometimes it works, and sometimes it's kind of strange. Right. I've grown carrots so close together that they actually were square.
There you go.
You know, they had beautiful, lovely, tasty carrots, but they were all square carrots. You know, and that was the courtesy of very fertile soil, but right. Yeah, you know, you can experiment. You know, have I ever grown square carrots again? No.
Exactly.
Actually, I found the square carrots weren't a big hit with anybody, other than the initial curiosity.
That spirit of experimentation is really part of what's going on. It's like, how do you just try it out and learn? And while we have an abundance of resources and some time, is a good time. This is a good time to relearn some of these skills and to really get reconnected to kind of what's essential about being a human being and how we take care of ourselves and how we take care of the places where we live, and how we can live in better alignment with the reality of resources and resource use and resource availability and the changes that are happening. Like there's a lot of large-scale, global-size problems that we're facing as a species and as a globe. I mean, I come from that perspective that there's really a lot of things happening on the large scale that as individuals we don't have much control over, but there's a lot of home-scale solutions to some of the problems. That's what's so interesting and exciting about this time. It's like you can talk climate change, and it's gigantic, right? And what can you do? And then there's certain things you can do every day that actually reduce your carbon output. So you can go to bed at the end of the day and say, I did the best I could today. And that's like, at a time like this, like, that's good. That's good news, And so partly we wrote the book because we felt like it was good news in a bad news time. Like there's a lot of crises that we face, all fairly intertwined and all solvable, but we're in a really politically polarizing moment in our country where even though we can all agree that we're human beings who need the same thing, we do not have the same strategy about how to get there. And so that's challenging. That's something we have to overcome, or figure out how to accommodate all of these differences as we move towards a way of living that's actually not take out the ecosystems that we depend on to live, because it's just the bottom line.
And we're dealing now with, such a huge amount of diversity, even in your legal rights and what you do with your land. Like, last week we had on a guest who lives in, she was talking about lasagna gardening, but she was also talked about, living in these subdivisions where they have these homeowners associations, which tells you what you can and can't do,
right,
especially at least in the front part of your yard. Some of them also restrict what you can do in the back.
Right.
And we're not moving into one of those. We're moving into a post-war, post-World War II neighborhood. So it's an old neighborhood. Thankfully, not one that's decayed and it's had to be restored. But it is an old neighborhood, and so I don't have those issues to deal with. But so many people think that when you do landscaping, you do it once and you're done. And I'm like, oh, how boring that would be.
Right.
For me, it's like a continual evolution. You start with something and it's like, I like that, we'll build them that, and or I don't like that, that's going to go away next year.
Right.
So I like things that are transitory. Like one of my favorite vines to grow if I want temporary shade or to block something temporarily, and I don't want to commit to anything. I love to plant loofah sponges. They have these beautiful leaves and flowers, and then they have a useful fruit.
Absolutely.
And you're not committed. Next year they're not going to be coming up, and you're going to spend the rest of your life chopping them out.
Right.
And I've watched a lot of people battling vines. Living in Mississippi, vines are a problem.
So that's
one that you can plant and, sort of experiment with an idea. And I know a lot of things like that. And, so I've been looking at space-saving ideas, the vertical type arrangement with your gardening.
Right.
And,
right.
There's so many things to explore. And, it sounds like your book is really kind of taken all these things that are out there and said, okay, here's a little bit about each one.
Right. We tried to be quite comprehensive, and on that topic of space, that's an issue for people who have small spaces. We don't have an endless amount of space. We don't have a woodlot in the back and a sheep field in the front and an orchard that's separate. Everything's kind of all mushed together, and so you start getting creative about how you use space. And what we found is like it's easy to grow vegetables in barrels, and vertical space is a really useful thing to think about when you live in a small space. You know, if you have a hot wall, you know, in the back of your house or alongside your house, you can trellis beans up there, you can grow tomatoes up there, you can grow a lot of different things in a space like that. And you just start getting super creative. So there's a lot of like creative space use ideas in the book. And the other thing that we come from is a discipline called permaculture. Are you familiar with it at all?
We've had guests on previously with permaculture. In addition, the lasagna gardening is encouraging of permaculture as well. So,
right.
You know, we've had some discussion previously on the program about permaculture and related concepts.
Yeah, so there's some concepts in permaculture that I find really useful in terms of how to redesign things, and one of them is this idea of stacking functions, where every object in your design, every element, has more than one function. So when you have so like the chicken, for example, has the multiple functions of giving you eggs and meat, and then will peck your garden and turn it over, and it gives you fertilizer, and it's more entertaining to watch than TV. So it's like multiple functions that serve.
They were also my garbage disposal for, things that went bad. Like when I planted Armenian cucumbers too close to cantaloupe, and you couldn't eat either one.
Yeah. They'll turn like major buckets of compost into. They'll just evaporate them in like a day. It's amazing. Right? It's really quite amazing. So you think about how to really make every bit of space count in a small space, and that's some of like the exciting, creative, artistic part of it. It's like, how are you going to design this space so that it serves the dual needs of a place to hang out, a place to grow food, a place where maybe animals live. Lots of different families have lots of different needs from their outdoor space, and so you get to really design with all those things in mind in a way that's efficient. To think about the efficiency. Yeah,
and when I'm looking at it, I'm like, okay, we need space because we have 3 rescue dogs, and while they're all older and they don't run and jump like they used to, they still need some space to go lounge in the sun.
Sure.
And, you have all this shade because we have, of course, in an older neighborhood, you've got big trees, and not necessarily one where the type that you would normally have planted for yourself, but this tree was planted 60, 70 years ago. So, to remove it's a huge expense, especially if it's not necessary to take it out. And shade, when you live in Mississippi, is, you got to do something to combat the heat.
Yeah, we have that here, too. I love our trees that they provide shade. It's blaring here where I live, too. So it's, I get it.
Yeah, we have some friends that have a yard like a golf course, no trees. It's like an oven.
Yeah,
from May to October, you can't stand to be outside during the day because it's literally bakes you to death. It's so hot, it's cooking their grass. And I'm like, why do you want a golf course for a yard? I don't get it, but that happens to be their thing. I'm like, you have all this beautiful space, and there's nothing growing in it.
I know. Yeah.
It's essentially what people, want to deal with. And some people just find the idea of gardening to be too much work. But as you said, they may be a candidate for letting someone else garden in their space, too.
Yeah, they really might. And people, the benefits of that relationship in my life have been far-reaching. I really recommend that. And I also really recommend that people, if they're interested and concerned about sustainability and the utter unsustainability of the current American systems, then there's lots of ways to get involved. There's lots of things to do. Like, I talk to young people a lot. I go to universities a lot. And I really thought about it. It's like, here's these kids. They're like 18, 19, 20, 21. They're not settled down. They might not settle down in any one place for a while. They'll be renters, or they'll be a bit transient, because that's what young people often do. And how can they hook in? And I started thinking about just the process of creating as little waste as possible, because that's one of the problems we have, is that we're just an enormous amount of waste. So people who are young starting to embody these practices of zero waste in terms of not using plastic, not buying water bottles, using less water, figuring out how to deal with their garbage, getting into recycling and reusing and repurposing materials, being really wise about where they're spending their consumer dollars on stuff, what stuff do they need, kind of breaking the habit of just buying mindlessly. If you take on those practices and they become your own when you're young, then that becomes how you live when you do settle down and you make different choices from the get-go about how you're going to work with resources. So I think there's a way for everybody to find a place where they can participate in this great work of repairing the world. It's really kind of how I see it.
Even because many people are not concerned beyond their own little bubble, you might say. They don't care about the rest of the world.
I know.
But even then, most people are concerned when it involves their wallet.
Yeah,
and the fact of the matter is, if you're conserving energy, you're not spending money on energy. If you're not wasting things, you're not wasting money.
Right. Yeah, I mean, to me, that's like the lowest common denominator that pulls people in. I agree with you. Most people don't think beyond themselves or their families, and money is one way to help people see it, like that it is a money saving. I think a more enticing way is that there's a lot of fun to be had in this way of living. There's a lot of gratification in doing things yourself and in gaining skills that help you. It's a game, yeah. They can really be like...
last year, Greg and I actually finally got married, and our penny-pinching wedding, because we had a hippie beach wedding, because we had a lot of fun with it.
Yeah.
It became a game. Can I really come in under $200 for everything?
Right.
And we did it. We were really penny pinching on it. We found a free location on the beach. With a canopy thing. And everything we did, we were really being cost conscious in choosing what we did and didn't do, and yet we still had just as much fun. I mean, granted, we're not young. We didn't need the traditional thing going on. We wanted something that was fun for everybody, us and our friends and family. And we achieved that, and we stayed in budget, and people look at me like I'm crazy or that I didn't take it serious. It was like, no, I took it, the wedding thing was very serious. The game part was seeing, can we stay in budget?
Right. Well, and I think that breaking that connection between money or success and status objects, or any of those ways that we kind of associate like what we have with who we are as being a way to value who we are, I think is part of this perverted dominant culture that we live in. And these things are not true. You can be happy, you can be healthy, you can be prosperous without being rich and without buying and spending and using all new things or replacing your bathroom towels every 20 minutes, whatever it is. People, I think, get into this buying frenzy that isn't really connected with need and, sort of like go towards more of the other part of my life, the therapist part of my life. Like, you see a lot of that with people who are unhappy, who are trying to fill some emptiness in themselves. And I think in some ways the culture generates that kind of emptiness because there's a lot of spiritual vacuum in our country. For a lot of people, things have lost some meaning and communities have frayed and people's work doesn't serve them in the same way because they're not taken care of in the same way by their employers. There's a lot of, people's families split up more easily, and so there's a lot of emptiness and a lot of pain that I think people fill with stuff. And I know that I went to the homesteading life not with that kind of emptiness, but with fear and anxiety. Future, what's happening here? What's going to happen? Things don't look so steady. And I had a daughter like 3 weeks before 9/11, which was an intense time to become a parent. You see these towers falling, and you hear all this war-mongering rhetoric, and it's like, ooh, things aren't looking so good. And I really, and I really thought. I thought, okay, stuff's going to start happening here. This is intense. And I really started spontaneously learning how to do a lot of these things in my own kitchen, on my own mostly. But it did come out of fear about the future. And you know, you're a parent, so there's something about the future. You get connected to the future in a really different way when you're a parent, because the future is real through the life of your child. You know, and you want for your children. You want.
And believe me, it gets even more intense when you become a grandmother. I have a granddaughter that's going to be 2 this fall, and it's like it's really changed the way I regard the future in many, many different ways.
Of course, right? And think about those really little ones now who are coming in. Like, what is going to be for them? You know, like, and will they have the resources they need? And will the culture be so split and so polarized, or will everyone be armed or diabetic and falling down? Who knows what's going to happen in this country? You know.
Yeah. So, well, I think about it. I was a nonconformist. I've obviously raised my daughter to be a nonconformist. And, I'm looking at my granddaughter and I'm going, well, are you going to be like us or not? She's right now at 2. She's a lot of fun because she's so curious about the world. It's interesting to watch her problem solving and learning about how things work together, learning about pretend, which at this age, pretend is just becoming the thing. And it was a plastic fruit and stuff like that. When we're pretending, she still actually bites, and stuff.
Right.
So it's interesting to watch, the evolution of pretend as she goes through it. So in a way, it's for me, it's bringing the past and the present sort of into one, and then this huge looking towards the future.
Yeah.
And we haven't had kids in the family in a long time now, so it's shifted a lot of things in the way we think about doing things, in the way we plan activities, because now we have to plan for a toddler. And, toddlers have different requirements from the rest of us.
Yeah.
Like, they don't like long terms of nothing and don't expect us to sit here through it because it's not going to happen. So it's sort of, in a way, spurred my interest back into the things that I did when my kids were younger, which is, the more outdoorsy gardening things, even the fun things. I talked about it last week, too. One time with the kids, I made a huge bed that we called the Hand of Time. It was shaped like a hand. And so we had to, of course, since it was the Hand of Time, we had to put a lot of different kinds of time in it.
Yeah.
But, we made gardening into a funsy, whimsical sort of experience. It wasn't just food. It was fun, too.
Yeah, absolutely.
It was almost an art form, choosing what went in it, making the shape in the ground, the whole bit,
Yeah, yeah.
Because it doesn't have to all be ugly and utilitarian.
No, not at all. And I actually feel like beauty is an essential function of the garden and of the whole homesteading life. Like, people building houses out of cob and straw and bamboo and, putting these whimsical touches in them and, like, recycling pieces of glass and, making these beautiful mosaics. Like, you can make great beauty out of things that other people think of as garbage. And it's totally affordable, accessible, easy to do. And there's so much that feeds the spirit in doing these kind of things and doing them to people you love and teaching kids about them and seeing what you can learn to do with your own hands. We've lost a lot of that in this era where so much is done for us and we expect everything we want whenever we want it. And, it's not really how the world works. We're kind of in an illusion about access to things, I think, for a lot of people. And it's something so... For me, it's been so healing to just sort of like have the food that grows where I live when it's in season and to make certain things with my hands and learn like, well, that's not really my highest skill, but I can pull that off. Or, where I have skill and where I don't and where I need help from neighbors or friends. Like, oh, you're really, really better at building than I am. Could you please help me with this? Or I grow a mean tomato, but I'm not so good on the zucchini. Whatever it is, like there's, again, ways to have these reciprocal relationships with people that feel also nourishing and like you're connected to people in a different way.
And sometimes there's an element of learning that the learning curve is almost part of the fun. I can remember the first, I'm using building pretty loosely here, the first building I built. And everybody looked at it and said, what is that? I said, it's a piece of artwork. We call it The Shed. You know, it's not dark. You know? Yeah, we put stuff in it. It's called The Shed. Was it square? No. Was it lopsided? Yeah. Did it keep the rain out? No, but I lived in the desert, so that wasn't a huge issue. It was more or less a place to contain things out of sight,
right.
You know? You know, would a shed that I built today look like that? No. I've gotten much better in the last 30 years.
Right.
But the first one was, yeah, I really did call it, I said, that's my sculpture, and it's called The Shed. Yeah. Everybody thought I was being cute. You know, it was really bad.
I built a chicken coop with a friend. She lived around the corner. We decided to share the flock and share the coop and share the project of building it. And our kids were younger. I think they were like 5 or 6 maybe. And, you know, it took us all summer to build a chicken coop. We didn't have any contractors for husbands. We did it ourselves. We had to work out our relationship while we did it. She was super detailing-oriented. I was like, let's just do this thing. You know, we had really different processes. It was at her house. So she had a lot of requirements about how beautiful it was going to, you know, just a lot of aesthetic concerns. And it was a great feeling when it was done. You know, we made a beautiful chicken coop, and the chickens were super happy, and she was happy with how it looked, and our families got closer because we shared it. And we had a sense of accomplishment when we were done. We were proud of ourselves. And I got to the end of it, I was like, I don't need to do that again. I'm not a builder. I'm not that into it. It's not that fun for me. It's too detail-oriented. I would way rather be out in the garden or digging a hole, or, you know, there's just other things that I'm more inspired by. So that's also kind of why I keep saying to people, like, find something you really dig, you know, and do it. It's really,
right. You know, I know I happen to be one of those people that likes things to come to completion fairly quickly. You know, my family has always been, the women have been quilters. Well, this hand piecing of these itty-bitty pieces to make these big quilts and then hand quilting it, oh no, it's so not happening with me.
Yeah, that's a big
I just
job.
don't have that patience. I don't want to work on a project for a year. I want it done next week.
I hear you.
You know, so I don't do that. I do machine quilting, and I just tie them, and I'm done in less than a week. Sometimes I'm done in a single day. You know, and it's because I don't have the sustained interest. If it's going to take me a year, it's going to end up on the shelf in the closet, and it's going to take 20 years.
Well,
because I'm just not going to do it.
Yeah, it's good to know that about.
You know, that's not something I'm going to try doing anymore. I mean, been there, done that. It's like counted cross stitch and candle wicking and macrame and crochet and knitting and all that. It's like, no, that's just not me, you know. I just don't have the ability to sit there and do that. You know, I like things that, you know, I can do them, I see progress. You know, gardening is sort of, you know, granted, when you plant a tree, it's a long time from planting that tree until you pick the fruit from it. Sure. But you have that tree right there in front of you. It's growing, and you can see it's growing. You're not having to hold its hand while it grows.
Right. And
I do like that, you know, much better over the itty-bitty pieces being pieced together by hand. Yeah. Mm-hmm. I can very much agree on the concept of letting those who do well at something trade it off for something they don't do as well.
I think it's a good way to go because, you know, the other thing that I think we labor under is this idea, and I think the homesteading way kind of points to is this idea of self-sufficiency. And I think that we can be more self-sufficient when we live on more land. You know, we can do a lot more. But in the city, self-sufficiency it's not a goal. It's not going to happen, and it's really more about just our dependence with each other. So that means, you know, finding other people who do other things better than you, or whose labor you can buy or trade with, or just to have the resources that you need, and building that network. And I think that that's some of the ways that, like, the local economy gets stronger when there's people around you who are really good at certain things who you rely on and have relationships with, rather than everything being outsourced or having to go to a big box store to get what you need. It's really more interesting to have a life where you have relationships with people who do different things, and you can relate to them about it. And I think that is also kind of gestures back to an old way. Like that's how people used to live. There were small towns or small groups of people who had lots of different skills, and they helped each other out. And I just think it's a better model for human settlement than what we've currently got going on. So I like being part of creating that sort of new local economy.
Well, there's lots of other things. When I lived in New Orleans, obviously I was a renter, and I did not have what they call Japanese plums, but it's also the rest of the world knows it as a locut. They grew all over in the city, but I didn't have one, and I wanted to make some jam with them because I think they're really good.
Yeah.
And it was okay. I had to find somebody who had a tree, and I traded them. I'm good at making the jam, but I don't have a tree. I can't buy it at the store.
Right.
So can I pick the fruit from your tree so it doesn't end up in your lawn, and I'll give you some jam in return? I was like, yeah, sure.
Yeah.
That's a very viable way of acquiring what you need.
I do that all the time. I have like a pear tree around the corner and a plum tree by the creek, and I have a friend who lives in an apple orchard. He just lets everything fall on the ground, and I'm like, I am coming to your house to get your food. And I have a persimmon tree down the road. Like I can't grow all those trees on my property, and I planted the trees like 5 years ago. They don't have that much fruit yet. They're still growing. So even less time. So I think that's a great way to go. And we talk about that a lot in the book, so I just love that. There's this group down in Los Angeles called Fallen Fruit. They're like an artist collective, and their whole thing is about, they started out by making maps of their neighborhoods where all the fruit trees were dropping fruit on the sidewalks. Go and pick it up and eat it instead of letting it rot in the streets, because that's what happens a lot. People don't have time or interest in gathering the food, and they just let it rot, and that's just kind of...
A lot of people don't even realize that it's edible.
I know, or they think, oh, it's covered in smog or it's covered in dirt, and what are you going to do? And it's like, oh, my God, you're going to wash it and you're going to eat it. That's what you're going to do. So I love that. I love that
I had first tried mulberries when I lived in Arizona, and the mulberries there they're very bland and mealy and tasteless, and all they do is leave purple stains.
Right.
So obviously I wasn't very interested in mulberries. The first time somebody in Mississippi got me to taste a mulberry, before 30 minutes passed, I looked like your average 5-year-old in a berry tree.
Yeah.
I mean, my face is purple, my hands are purple, and I'm just eating away.
Yeah.
I had never eaten anything so good. This is like the best blackberries without all the seeds.
I know, blackberries are a tough crop to pick, man. They are mean.
Oh, yeah. I always end up feeling like I'd been whipped with something.
I know.
Yeah.
I know.
And the mulberries were so easy. We simply stretched out a tarp, shook the tree, and they landed on the tarp, and we dumped them in a bucket.
There you go. That's the way.
And, I had enough for 5 gallons of juice, and it took us about 10 minutes to collect them.
Nice. You've lived in lots of different parts of the country, lots of different environments.
Well, yeah, I guess so. I mean, I haven't lived everywhere by any stretch of the imagination, but
you said Arizona,
I did spend most of my life in Arizona, and then I lived in New Orleans for 7 or 8 years, and now I live in Mississippi, and I grew up along the Iowa-Minnesota border. So, I've tried out a little bit of climate change. I know the difference between hot and cold.
Yeah,
lots of snow and no snow.
Yeah, for sure. Interesting.
Yeah.
One thing I wanted to say also is that we're renters. We don't own our property, but we have a really we have a sort of absent landlord who's very he's been very generous about letting us do stuff. So like when we got rid of the front lawn because his irrigation system broke, and I said to him, if you don't fix this irrigation, I'm not going to water your grass. It's not going to happen. And he chose not to fix it, and so we sheet mulched it and, covered it with lots of different layers of dirt and compost and planted gardens. And we've done a lot here. And we've put in a gray water system, and we've put in all these raised beds, and we built a little shack in the back where my husband works, so his commute is like 150 yards from kitchen to office, which is really ideal. And, we've been busy here, and I like to let people know that you don't have to own your property to live this way. You can actually you just need to get started, and there's lots of things you can do wherever you are, and I think we have this idea that ownership confers it does, confer a kind of right to how you live. But if you have the kind of landlord we have who's like pretty hands-off, the negative side of his hands-offness is he doesn't fix anything, but the positive side is he doesn't get in our way. We never see him. We never talk to him. He just basically wants his rent check, and that's the end of the story. And so we've been very free here. So I think it's good.
Well,
recently
we stayed in a motel in the Jackson, Mississippi area, and as we were checking out, I'm looking over and I could see these stakes with plants on them, and being naturally kind of nosy, I was curious what they were, and so I walked to the area where they were, and stashed in among the shrubbery and whatnot were tons of 5-gallon buckets, all with various kinds of garden plants growing in them. Some on stakes, some cascading down the sides, and whatnot. And yet they were very portable. I'm assuming that the people who ran the motel this was their garden space. I have no idea. They weren't plants that were familiar to me, so I have no idea what they were growing. Other than, I could recognize things like tomatoes, but most of the other plants I had no idea what they were. But, I've grown things in 5-gallon buckets, which even if you have a landlord that doesn't want you digging up the dirt,
right,
you can grow something in those buckets.
You bet.
I just drilled holes in the bottom of them, and either gravel or if I had no gravel, because sometimes you don't have gravel, depending on where you're living. Like southern Mississippi has no rocks. I put down coffee filters. No rocks, yes. No rocks. Coming from a rock-hounding family in Arizona, no rocks is like, there are no rocks here.
That's interesting. Yeah, I mean, there's a lot of stuff in the book about portable projects, things you can take with you, things that don't cost a lot to make. Yeah, things that come with you where you go, because...
And a lot of times you can get these buckets from restaurants, grocery places, all sorts of businesses are going to have buckets.
Yep, absolutely. Buckets, barrels, water troughs. Yeah, there's lots of containers, garbage cans. You can grow great potatoes in a garbage pail. There's lots you can do in things that are movable, for sure. Absolutely.
Or even those plastic storage bins that you can pick up for not much. A lot of times people will crack one. Well, it's no good for storing something in. Cracked, it's just going to let excess water go out, so it's not that big of a deal.
You actually can make something called a self-watering container with 2 of those. You stack them, and then you put holes in the top one, and you put a pipe from the bottom to the top, and you pour the water in through the pipe into the bottom barrel, and the plants suck it up. So you only have to water much more rarely, and it conserves water and conserves time and energy in terms of you having to tend to your plants. So there's a design for that in the book also about how to create a self-watering container.
Yeah, see, gardening in Mississippi is a new experience for me because unlike when you gardened on the desert and I had to conserve water, here often we're trying to figure out how to get it to go away.
Yeah, it's pretty wet down there, isn't it? Pretty damp.
Yeah, I think the average rainfall is 6 feet a year.
Oh my God!
And I previously lived in an area that got 6 to 8 inches a year.
Right. Oh,
and
that's so different.
I can remember one year that at our house, it went a full year and never rained at our house. It might have rained around it, but it didn't rain at our house.
Hate that.
Yeah, you can smell it, you can see it, but it didn't hit the ground where you were at.
That'd be hard for me. I don't like that.
And you could be here, and I think the last month, probably 20 of the last 30 days, it's rained.
Wow.
So it's radically different. And anytime you move to a different part of the country, excuse me, it becomes a whole new equation on how to deal with it. What grows, what doesn't grow. Things that I could grow without, even thinking about it. I have not picked a tomato yet. Yeah, tomatoes will not grow for me.
One of the things we really were trying to make sure we did in our book was that we didn't write a book that was about any specific region of the country or the world, because we were really aware that every place has different conditions. So we talked really more about basic principles for growing or how to think about designing your homestead, and really encouraged people to get information from local sources about what grows well, what the growing seasons are, like all of those things that are different from place to place. Because like you're saying, like, you know, that disparity of conditions between Arizona and Mississippi is so extreme, but that's what people are dealing with. Like, this is very, like, you don't need to save water in Mississippi. You have to drain it out of your field. It's really different than Arizona. It's like every drop is like gold. So it's
right. And you know, in Arizona, I did waffle gardening. Here, I would have mosquito heaven. You know,
right.
It just wouldn't work. You know, so you do have to think differently. I was real creative. I actually adopted things that had been used by Colombian Native Americans to use in my own garden, and it worked real well for me.
Yeah.
Would I try that here?
I lived there for a long, long time. Well, and I'm sure the Native people had their own ways of dealing with the land there that are different and particular, for sure. Because people live
I know that I'm going to have to do a lot more research before I would call myself somewhat skilled even here, because like I said, you know, I've not been successful. Varieties of plants that grew well for me in Arizona don't grow here at all. I watched my tomatoes, and I chose varieties this year that were traditional to this area. And I watched them grow spindly and get about 2.5 feet tall, and then just the next morning they're all dead.
Huh. I wonder what that was about.
And I have no idea what's going on. I'm assuming it's something with the soil in a particular location.
Yeah, that makes sense.
Am I going to get upset about it? No, I'm moving. It doesn't matter. You know?
Right.
Yeah. So, you know, I have learned that just because this looks like a wonderful variety and whatnot, it may not grow well here. I've discovered that if you are not picking what tomatoes you haven't harvested by about middle to end of June here, that's it. The tomato plants are not going to do anything the rest of the year. So, anyhow, folks, it is time for us to go on break. So, hold on to your papers, Serenity, and we'll be right back with our guest, Rachel Kaplan, in just a few minutes with more conversation that is sure to interest you.